She stepped out of the black SUV, and in that single moment, the perfect, curated world Arthur had built for himself shattered into dust, exposing the hollow foundations he'd laid himself. 2 opera tickets, those precious slips of paper he'd acquired to perform the role of a cultured man, nearly slipped from his numb fingers. The chilled city air was a thick mix of wet concrete, expensive perfume, and the low buzz of anticipated spectacle. His hand tightened around Lily's, a young, radiant associate from work, still blissfully unaware she was merely a disposable player in a game she didn't know existed. Then the door opened, and there she was, Victoria. Not as his wife, but as a vision of cold, elegant vengeance, wrapped in a dress the color of deep burgundy that he knew, with a sickening certainty, cost more than his annual car lease. The fabric moved like liquid, catching the harsh light of the venue's canopy. She didn't glance in his direction. Her gaze passed through the space he occupied as if it were empty, as if he were a glitch in her new reality. Arthur stood, paralyzed, while Victoria, his Vicky, the woman who for 15 years had managed the quiet engine of his domestic life, ascended the steps on the arm of a stranger. The man's suit was a masterpiece of understated wealth, his posture radiating a calm, unassailable authority that made Arthur's own designer label feel like a costume. He leaned in, his lips close to her ear, whispering words meant only for her. And there it was, a genuine, subtle tremor of a smile at the corner of her mouth, a sight so foreign it felt like a physical blow. "Arthur, who were those people?" Livy whispered, her voice now laced with a sharp new thread of anxiety, cutting through her earlier excitement. He couldn't form words. A tight, invisible wire of shame and dawning comprehension was strangling his throat. Because in that ice-cold second, the full, monstrous truth detonated within him. Victoria knew. She had known for a long time. This evening, this opera, this chance encounter, it was all a meticulously staged production. This wasn't a display of power. It was a silent, elegant declaration of total war, issued without a single shot. A war he had already lost, without ever knowing the battles had been fought. Arthur had always fancied himself a self-made success, a solid mid-tiered director at a reputable tech firm, piloting a German sedan that smelled of ambition and leased luxury, wearing a watch that anchored his wrist with the satisfying weight of perceived status. He collected the admiring glances of junior colleagues like digital trophies. His success was a tangible brand, the right podcasts in his earbuds, the right jargon in meetings, the curated chaos of his standing desk. But home was a different, quieter app that ran in the background, a stable, predictable environment maintained by Victoria. She was the flawless, silent operating system of his personal life. She asked about his day. He'd grunt a monosyllabic reply, eyes on his phone screen. She'd talk about their son, Ben, a teenager navigating his own stormy updates, about a pending home repair, about a book. Arthur would nod, mutter, not truly processing. His mind was already elsewhere, chasing the next dopamine hit of a closed deal or the addictive validation of a notification. Lily had been that validation incarnate. 26, with a laugh engineered for viral appeal, and a gaze that made him feel like an innovator, not just a manager. She was a thrilling side project, a live demonstration of his own perceived desirability. The first mentorship coffee, the first debrief drink that slipped into personal territory, the first text after hours, miss your energy in these dull meetings. Each step felt like unlocking a new achievement. What he'd completely missed was the silent audit running in the background of his own life. Victoria hadn't missed the unfamiliar citrus note clinging to his collar, his phone now perpetually resting screen down like a guilty secret, the new cryptic smile that played on his lips while texting. She didn't confront or weep. She began to compile evidence with the cold precision of a forensic accountant. A separate banking app on her phone, a discrete notes file logging his late nights and unexplained charges, a cleverly phrased question to a tech-savvy nephew that yielded a name, Lily Dawson. And she found a consultant, not a lover, an ally, Michael Thorne, a quietly influential figure in sustainable design who possessed the rare skill of deep, uninterrupted listening. He didn't flatter her, he engaged her. He helped her rediscover her own inherent value, not as Arthur's wife, but as Victoria, a stakeholder in her own existence. Her transformation was a strategic pivot. She traded generic yoga for intense Pilates reformer sessions, swapped gossip with friends for focused talks with a life coach, and reinvented her wardrobe not for trends, but for a feeling of unshakable authority. Blinded by the glow of Lily's admiration, Arthur noticed none of it. So when Victoria mentioned a weekend wellness retreat with a friend, he just nodded, already mentally composing his next text to Lily. Victoria didn't go to a spa. She went to a consultation with a divorce attorney whose name alone could make seasoned CEOs blanch. Now, inside the gilded auditorium, the full, humiliating scope of her campaign became clear. Victoria was seated in the central balcony box, the impossible-to-get seats that were less about viewing and more about being seen. Beside her, Michael Thorne surveyed the crowd with an expression of relaxed ownership. Victoria's jewelry, sharp, geometric gold, was something Arthur had never seen, a hardware from her new life. If you're fascinated by these silent, strategic power shifts in relationships, consider hitting subscribe. We dive deep into the anatomy of personal reckonings here. Lily's manicured nails dug into his arm. "Arthur, that is literally your wife." Her whisper was a hiss. "It's complicated," he choked out, the word tasting like ash. "Complicated? She's with him, in the diamond box. What is this?" He had no answer. He could only watch, gutted, as Michael leaned over and said something that made Victoria's eyes crinkle with genuine, quiet amusement. At intermission, drawn by a force he couldn't resist, he found her near the marble bar. "Victoria, we need to talk. Now." She turned. Her face showed no anger, no hatred. It held something far worse, a clean, absolute indifference. A firewall had been installed. "Yes? This whole performance. What are you doing?" "I'm attending a performance, Arthur," she clarified, her voice calm and unnervingly clear. "Your performance seems to be happening out here. My lawyer sent the finalized documents to your email and your assistant on Tuesday. You haven't acknowledged them." The terms were a masterclass in brutal efficiency. The suburban house, its mortgage, quietly paid off with an inheritance he'd forgotten she had. The investment portfolio she'd nurtured separately. Primary custody of Ben, supported by a psychologist's report and Ben's own stated preference for her structured and authentic environment. "You can't just dismantle everything." "I already have," she said, and for a fleeting second he saw not malice, but the cool satisfaction of a complex problem solved. "You were busy running a beta test on a new relationship. I was finalizing the code for my own platform. We're not compatible anymore." Michael appeared then, not with confrontation, but with simple, assured presence. He handed Victoria her wrap. "Everything all right?" he asked, his glance at Arthur brief and dismissive, as if scanning a bland piece of signage. "Perfect," she said, and her smile as she looked at Michael was the final, devastating data point. "We should get back." The legal process that followed was a cold, automated script. The final crushing line of code was a formal co-parenting plan where his time was subject to availability and pre-approval. One night, parked outside the house he no longer had the code to enter, he saw Ben through the kitchen window, laughing at something on his phone, the ambient light warm and unbroken. What's your take on this kind of quiet, strategic exit? Could it ever be justified, or is it always cruel? The debate's open in the comments below. Their final meeting was in a soulless cafe in a corporate plaza. She gave him 20 minutes. "I'm sorry, Victoria. I was an idiot. Blind." "You started logging out long before Lily ever appeared," she stated, sipping her espresso. Her clarity was disarming. "Every time you chose a podcast over a conversation, every anniversary your calendar didn't ping for, every dream of mine you archived as not relevant to current priorities. Lily was just the crash report. The core failure was much earlier." "I can fix this. We can go to therapy, rebuild." "No," she said. "Not with anger, but with the finality of a deployed software update. The we module is deprecated. I've rewritten my core functions. I don't love you anymore. Without mutual respect, love is just a corrupted file. It can't run." She left. He finally understood. His betrayal wasn't a single catastrophic error. It was 1,000 daily micro-indifferences, a catastrophic accumulation of system neglect. He'd failed to maintain the most critical application in his life, and now it had been permanently uninstalled from his device. Over a year later, from his generic rental box, he saw them walking through the drizzle. They shared an umbrella. She was pointing at something, talking animatedly, her face alive in a way he realized he'd rarely seen. She glanced toward his building without a flicker of recognition. He hadn't just been blocked, he'd been entirely deleted from his active directory. That night, he opened a blank document. The cursor blinked. He typed, deleted, typed again. Finally, he left one line. "I misunderstood the user manual. I thought love was a subscription service I was entitled to. It's not. It's a fragile local network requiring constant active maintenance. She wasn't a background process. She was the entire system, and I forced a shutdown." He closed the laptop. For the first time, the silence wasn't about what was missing, but about the brutal, necessary space it created for something new to boot up.